The Mafia State. First, we got a mafia economy. Then we got a mafia state. We must rid ourselves of the ruling criminal class or become its victims. Written by Chris Hedges for the Chris Hedges Report, chrishedges.substack.com. Narrated by Eunice Wong. Kiss the ring. Grovel before the Godfather. Give him tribute, a cut of the spoils. If he and his family get rich, you get rich. Enter his inner circle, his made men and women, and you do not have to follow rules or obey the law. You can disembowel the machinery of government. You can turn us and the natural world into commodities to exploit until exhaustion or collapse. You can commit crimes with impunity. You can make a mockery of democratic norms and social responsibility. Perfidy is very profitable at first. In the long term, it is collective suicide. America is a full-blown kleptocracy. The demolition of the social and political structure, begun long before Trump, makes a few very, very rich and immiserates everyone else. Mafia capitalism always leads to a mafia state. The two ruling parties gave us the first. Now we get the second. It's not only our wealth that is being taken from us, but our liberty. Since the election of Donald Trump, Elon Musk, currently worth $394 billion, saw his wealth increase by $170 billion. Mark Zuckerberg, worth $254 billion, saw his net worth increase by nearly $41 billion. Tidy sums for kneeling before Moloch. At least 11 federal agencies that have been affected by the slash-and-burn campaign of the Trump administration have more than 32 continuing investigations, pending complaints or enforcement actions, into Musk's 6 companies, according to a review by the New York Times. The mafia state ignores legal constraints and regulations. It lacks external and internal control. It cannibalizes everything, including the ecosystem, until there's nothing left but a wasteland. It can't distinguish between reality and illusion, which obscures and exacerbates gross incompetence. And then the hollowed-out edifice will collapse, leaving in its wake a shell of a country with nukes. The Roman and Sumerian empires fell this way. So did the Mayans and the sclerotic reign of the French monarch, Louis XVI. In the final stages of decay for all empires, the rulers, focused exclusively on personal enrichment, ensconced in their versions of Versailles or the Forbidden City, squeeze the last drops of profit from an increasingly oppressed and impoverished population and ravaged environment. Unprecedented wealth is inseparable from unprecedented poverty. The more extreme life becomes, the more extreme ideologies become. Huge segments of the population, unable to absorb the despair and bleakness, severs itself from a reality-based universe. It takes comfort in magical thinking, a bizarre millennialism, one embodied for us in a Christianized fascism, which turns con artists, morons, criminals, charlatans, gangsters, and grifters into prophets, while branding those who decry the pillage and corruption into traitors. The rush towards self-immolation accelerates intellectual and moral paralysis. The mafia state makes no pretense of defending the common good. Trump, Musk, and their minions are swiftly repealing executive orders regarding health, environmental and safety regulations, food assistance, as well as childcare programs such as Head Start. They're fighting a court order to halt their dismantling of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which has ensured that Americans have been reimbursed with more than $21 billion due to canceled debts, financial compensation, and other forms of consumer relief. They're abolishing the U.S. Agency for International Development. They're closing federal defenders' offices, which provide legal representation to the poor. They have cut billions of dollars from the budget of the National Institutes of Health, jeopardizing biomedical research and clinical trials. They have frozen permits for solar and wind projects, including sign-offs needed for projects on private land. They fired more than 300 staffers at the National Nuclear Security Administration, the agency that manages our nuclear stockpile. They're gutting the workforce of the Forest Service, Bureau of Land Management, National Park Service, Fish and Wildlife Service, and the United States Geological Survey. The Mafia state, its blueprint contained in Project 2025, ignores the dire lessons from history of extreme social inequality, political disintegration, wanton ecological plunder, and the evisceration of the rule of law. We are, of course, not naturally destined for freedom. It was 2 millennia before democracy reappeared in Europe after its collapse, largely because Athens became an empire, in ancient Greece. The Mafia state, not democracies, may be the wave of the future, one where the wealthiest 1% of the globe owns some 43% of all global financial assets, more than 95% of the human race, while 44% of the planet's population lives below the World Bank's poverty line of less than $6.85 per day. These calcified regimes endure solely because of draconian systems of internal control, wholesale surveillance, and the evisceration of civil liberties. We have at the same time wiped out 90% of the large fish, such as cod, sharks, halibut, grouper, tuna, swordfish, and marlin, and degraded or destroyed 2/3 of the mature tropical forests, the lungs of the planet. Lack of access to safe drinking water and the resultant spread of infectious diseases kills at least 1.4 million people annually, and also contributes to 50% of global malnutrition, according to the World Bank. Between 150 and 200 million children are impaired by malnourishment. Carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is well above the 350 parts per million that most climate scientists warn is the maximum level for sustaining life as we know it. By May of this year, atmospheric CO2 levels are forecast to reach 429.6 parts per million, the highest concentration in over 2 million years. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change estimates that the measurement could reach 541 to 970 parts per million by the year 2100. At that point, huge parts of the planet, beset with high population density, droughts, soil erosion, freak storms, massive crop failures, and rising sea levels, will be unfit for human existence. Clans in the later period of the Easter Island civilization competed to honor their ancestors by constructing larger and larger hewn stone images, which demanded the last remnants of the timber, rope, and manpower on the island. By the year 1400, the woods were gone. The soil had eroded and washed into the sea. The islanders began to fight over old timbers and were reduced to eating their dogs, and soon all the nesting birds. The desperate islanders developed a magical belief system that the erected stone gods, the Moai, would come to life and save them from disaster. The belief by Christian nationalists in the rapture, which does not exist in the Bible, is no less fantastic. These Christian fascists, embodied in Trump appointees such as Russell Vought, head of Trump's Office of Budget and Management, Vice President J.D. Vance, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, and Mike Huckabee, nominated to be the ambassador to Israel, intend to use schools and universities, the media, the judiciary, and the federal government as platforms to carry out indoctrination and enforce conformity. The followers of this movement defer to a leader they believe has been anointed by God. They embrace the illusion that the righteous will be saved, floating naked upwards into heaven at the end of time, and the secularists they despise will perish. This retreat into magical thinking, which is the foundation of all totalitarian movements, explains their suffering. It helps them cope with despair and anxiety. It gives them the illusion of security. It also ensures retribution against a long list of enemies: liberals, intellectuals, gays, immigrants, the deep state, blamed for their economic and social misery. Our millennialism is an updated version of the faith in the Moai, the doomed Taquiancoy revolt against the Spanish invaders in Peru, the Aztec prophecies of the 1530s, and the ghost dance, which Native Americans believed would see the return of the buffalo herds and slain warriors rise alive from the earth to vanquish the white colonizers. This retreat into fantasy is what happens when reality becomes too bleak to be absorbed. It is the appeal of Trump. Of course, this time it will be different. When we go down, The whole planet will go with us. There will be no new lands to pillage, no new peoples to exploit. We will be exterminated in a global death trap. Karl Polanyi, in The Great Transformation, writes that once a society surrenders to the dictates of the market, once its mafia economy becomes a mafia state, once it succumbs to what he calls the ravages of this satanic mill, it inevitably leads to the demolition of society. The mafia state cannot be reformed. We must organize to break our chains one by one, to use the power of the strike to cripple the state machinery. We must embrace a militant radicalism, one that offers a new vision and a new social structure. We must hold fast to moral imperatives. We must forgive mortgage and student debt, institute universal health care, and break up monopolies. We must raise the minimum wage and end the squandering of resources and funds to sustain the empire and the war industry. We must establish a nationwide jobs program to rebuild the country's collapsing infrastructure. We must nationalize the banks, pharmaceutical corporations, military contractors, and transportation, and embrace environmentally sustainable energy sources. None of this will happen until we resist. The mafia state will be brutal with any who revolt. Capitalists, as Eduardo Galeano writes, view communal cultures as enemy cultures. The billionaire class will do to us what it did to the radicals who rose up to form militant unions in the past. We had the bloodiest labor wars in the industrialized world. Hundreds of American workers were killed. Tens of thousands were beaten, wounded, jailed, and blacklisted. Unions were infiltrated, shut down, and outlawed. We can't be naive. It will be difficult, costly, and painful. But this confrontation is our only hope. Otherwise, we and the planet that sustains us are doomed. That was The Mafia State, written by Chris Hedges, narrated by Eunice Wong. For the Chris Hedges Report, chrishedges.substack.com.